Welcome to Goodreads AI. I'm Joe.
And I'm Zoe.
We'll be taking a really unique look at The Great Gatsby. We're going beyond the surface today, exploring the book's enduring power through some essential questions. Almost 100 years later, and it still has this pull on us.
It's true.
Like, we need to decode Gatsby himself, figure out what makes him tick and why his story still resonates so strongly.
And maybe understand how Fitzgerald captured the Roaring Twenties so perfectly that it still speaks to us today.
Going back and reading those excerpts, it's Gatsby's sheer determination, his drive to achieve his dreams, that really stood out to me. It's especially powerful because it's tied to this youthful belief that he can actually change his past.
It's a theme that a lot of younger readers connect with, that idea that you can reinvent yourself, become whoever you want to be.
Exactly. The text really emphasizes this idea that it doesn't matter where you come from, you can make your own destiny.
But Fitzgerald doesn't shy away from the darker side of that ambition. There's a sense of doom woven into the narrative. Like when the text suggests Gatsby was doomed from the start.
Oh yeah, that line is chilling every time I read it.
It makes you question if some dreams are just impossible to achieve, no matter how badly you want them.
Right. Like, Gatsby wants to be accepted by this upper-class world so badly. He throws these insane parties, surrounds himself with all the signs of wealth, but he's still an outsider, always on the edge, never truly part of the inner circle.
He's almost like Sisyphus, eternally pushing that boulder uphill, only for it to roll right back down. You know that Greek myth, the king who was punished for being deceitful?
I remember that one.
It's like Fitzgerald is making a connection between Gatsby's endless pursuit of Daisy and Sisyphus's pointless labor. Because it is pointless, right? His pursuit is based on an illusion.
And then there's that line about Gatsby's dreams being tied to Daisy's perishable breath. Beautiful but heartbreaking, right? His deepest desires are linked to something so fleeting.
Exactly. And it's almost as if Fitzgerald is saying that achieving the dream can actually diminish it. Like the chase itself is more meaningful, more beautiful than actually getting what you want.
It's a really interesting idea. And speaking of Daisy, she embodies that fleeting quality perfectly. Beautiful and alluring, but ultimately shallow and incapable of returning the depth of Gatsby's love.
It's tragic, really.
And it makes me think about what Fitzgerald's granddaughter said about him wanting to create something extraordinary and beautiful and simple and intricately patterned.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe Gatsby's longing for Daisy, his relentless pursuit, mirrors Fitzgerald's own experiences trying to climb the social ladder? Like he wanted to be part of this world that would always reject him.
It's definitely possible. A lot of famous authors draw inspiration from their own lives, weaving real experiences into their fiction.
Like that quote we got about writers being essentially nutcrackers, exposing the scandalous condition of the human soul.
Exactly. Maybe Gatsby's story, his downfall, is Fitzgerald's way of exposing the cruelty of the very system he wanted to be part of.
But as we delve deeper into the world of The Great Gatsby, there's one more question that lingers. What does the novel reveal about the seductive and ultimately destructive nature of consumerism?
This is where Fitzgerald's social commentary truly shines. The Roaring Twenties, with its exuberance and newfound wealth, mirrors our own times in a way that's both fascinating and unsettling.
It's a time of lavish parties, fast cars, and a relentless pursuit of pleasure. But beneath that glittering surface, there's a hollowness, a sense that true fulfillment remains elusive.
Fitzgerald doesn't shy away from depicting the allure of material possessions.
Right.
Gatsby's mansion, his extravagant parties, they're all symbols of his desire to impress, to create an image of success that will win Daisy back. But are those things truly fulfilling? Or are they just distractions from something deeper, something more meaningful?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? About the things we value, the ways in which consumerism shapes our desires and our sense of self-worth. Are we truly happier with more? Or are we chasing after something that can never truly satisfy us?
That's the question Fitzgerald wants us to grapple with, and it's a question that resonates with even greater urgency in our own time, a time of rampant consumerism and the constant bombardment of messages telling us that we need more to be happy.
It makes you wonder if we're all in a way chasing after our own green lights, our own versions of Gatsby's dream. But what happens when those dreams are built on a foundation of material possessions? What happens when the pursuit of more becomes our primary focus, eclipsing the deeper values of love, connection, and a sense of purpose?
Perhaps that's the enduring tragedy of The Great Gatsby. It's a cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of material wealth can come at a great cost, a cost that often extends far beyond our own individual lives.
And as we navigate a world that often glorifies excess and instant gratification, it feels like Fitzgerald is using Gatsby's story to hold a mirror up to society, doesn't it? To show us the seductive power of wealth and the emptiness that can linger beneath the surface.
He paints such a vivid picture of the Roaring Twenties, but it's not a celebration, it's a dissection. He peels back the layers of glamour to reveal the moral compromises, the reckless abandon, and the deep sense of disillusionment that simmered beneath.
And Fitzgerald's granddaughter in her foreword talks about how her grandparents' lives were marked by both brilliance and tragedy. Gatsby's world is dripping with excess. The parties, the mansion. Fitzgerald really lays it on thick when he's describing the extravagance of the Roaring Twenties.
And he does it on purpose. Remember the descriptions of Gatsby's car, the monstrous length, the labyrinth of windshields.
And how Daisy says his house looks like the World's Fair.
Right, it's not just about showing off wealth. Fitzgerald uses those descriptions to create a sense of unease, like there's something not quite right beneath all the glitter.
It's like we're both in awe of all that wealth and disgusted by it at the same time. Drawn to the glamour, but also feeling like it's too much. Like all that stuff just hides a deeper emptiness.
And that emptiness is really apparent when you compare West Egg to the Valley of Ashes. It's this desolate wasteland that completely contrasts with the opulence of Gatsby's world. Remember how one of the sources mentioned that the book was really popular with soldiers during World War II?
Yeah.
I think it's because of that contrast, the glittering parties next to the grim reality of the Valley of Ashes. It speaks to a sense of disillusionment, law, innocence, which is something those soldiers coming back from war really understood.
So you're saying that Gatsby's parties, fueled by his probably shaky money, actually represent the hollowness at the heart of the Roaring Twenties, like a society about to implode, trying to ignore the warning signs by clinging to material possessions.
It's a really interesting interpretation, and it fits with historical context, right? The Roaring Twenties, with all its economic boom and insane consumerism, led right into the Great Depression. Maybe Fitzgerald, with his sharp observations of society, was picking up on the cracks in the facade, sensing the doom hiding beneath all the fun.
It's like he's using Gatsby's story as a warning, like be careful about putting too much emphasis on getting rich and achieving the American dream, because it might not be all it's cracked up to be. Which is crazy when you think about how popular this book still is. What is it about this story, set in the Jazz Age, that still speaks to us today?
Well, I think it's because the core themes are universal. Love, loss, ambition, the desire for happiness. Those are things everyone experiences, no matter what time period you live in.
Yeah, that's true.
And even though we aren't living in the Roaring Twenties anymore, we still face a lot of the same challenges and temptations, which is probably why the book became popular again in the 1960s, another time of big social upheaval and questioning traditional values.
Right, right.
And we can't forget Fitzgerald's language. It's just so powerful. One source even called it pitch perfect. That lyrical quality, his ability to make you feel things just through the way he uses words and images, is a big part of why this novel has such a lasting impact.
It's true. Even those short excerpts are packed with emotion. The green light, the parties, that final line about beating on, boats against the fart, those are images that stay with you long after you've finished reading.
It's like a haunting melody that echoes through time, reminding us of the beauty and sadness of life, the eternal struggle of trying to reconcile our dreams with the realities of the world.
So we've talked about Gatsby's dream, the allure and danger of consumerism, and the power of Fitzgerald's writing. But there's one crucial piece we haven't gotten to yet. The relationships that shaped Gatsby's fate. The people who both help him and ultimately contribute to his downfall.
You're right.
Because Gatsby's story isn't just about his own internal battles. It's about how those battles play out in his relationships with other people. And I think if we really want to understand him, we need to take a closer look at those connections, starting with the most important one of all, his relationship with Daisy Buchanan.
She's definitely a key piece of the puzzle.
She's the catalyst for everything, the driving force behind his ambitions. But who is she, really? What motivates her? And what role does she ultimately play in Gatsby's tragic end? Let's dive into that. On the surface, she's all jazz-age sparkle and charm. But the excerpts hint at something much darker going on beneath that facade. A deep sadness.
You pick up on that too, huh? There's definitely a vulnerability to Daisy, a kind of disillusionment that seems to come from her upbringing, her wealth, and maybe even her marriage to Tom.
Yeah, it's like she's got it all, but it hasn't brought her happiness. Remember that line where she says she hopes her daughter will be a beautiful little fool? Pretty bleak, sorry.
It is, and it says a lot about how Daisy sees the world, especially the world of the upper class. Like, she recognizes the limitations placed on women in that social circle, and thinks being naive is the only way to survive it.
Like ignorance is bliss.
Exactly. And maybe that's why Gatsby is so appealing to her. He represents an escape, a return to a time when she was young and innocent and believed in love, before the cynicism of her world set in.
Before Tom, basically.
Right. And Gatsby is obsessed with that version of Daisy, the one he knew 5 years before she got married. He's built up this whole fantasy in his mind about who she is and who they were together.
But it's just a fantasy, right?
It is. He's in love with a ghost, a memory, not the real flesh and blood woman she's become.
And it's interesting because Daisy kind of plays into that fantasy for a while. Maybe not consciously, but she lets him believe it.
She's drawn to his passion, to the intensity of his feelings. It's a change from the coldness of her marriage.
But ultimately, she's too tied to her world. Too used to the comforts and security that come with being Tom Buchanan's wife, even if he's a jerk.
Which she is, let's be real. But her connection to Tom, even with all his infidelity and disregard for her, represents stability, a sense of belonging, something he's not willing to give up, even for a love as powerful as what she feels for Gatsby.
And it's that push and pull that makes their relationship so tragic. They're connected by this shared past, but ultimately kept apart by the huge gap between their social worlds and their totally different perspectives on life.
And it all explodes in that scene at the Plaza Hotel. Remember that?
Oh man, that scene is intense. When Gatsby confronts Tom and demands that Daisy admit she loved him.
Like he's forcing her to choose, to finally acknowledge the truth.
But Daisy can't do it. She can't fully break away from Tom, and she doesn't want to lose the privileges of her life. It's like she's frozen, caught between what she wants and what she's afraid of.
And Gatsby's whole world starts to fall apart. Tom, seeing how vulnerable Gatsby is, uses that moment to expose him, reveal his true background, shatter the image he so carefully built.
It's brutal, and it highlights something else that Fitzgerald is getting at in the novel, the destructiveness of social class and the hypocrisy of the wealthy elite.
Right. Tom, even with all his flaws, uses his money and status to take Gatsby down, make him seem unworthy of Daisy.
A classic power play, and it reveals just how cruel this social hierarchy is, that the rules are different for people like Gatsby.
And Daisy, torn between her heart and her head, takes the easy way out. She retreats back to the safety of her marriage, leaving Gatsby to deal with the consequences alone.
It's heartbreaking, and it shows the limitations of her character. She's incapable of rising above the social pressures, of sacrificing her privilege for a love that challenges everything her world is built on.
And by choosing Tom, she's choosing to maintain the very system that keeps Gatsby an outsider. It's like Fitzgerald is saying true social mobility is just an illusion, especially for people who try to reach beyond their assigned place.
And that decision seals Gatsby's fate. He's exposed, stripped of his illusions, seen as a fraud by the people he so desperately wanted to be a part of. He becomes vulnerable to the people who resist his success and envy his wealth.
So we have Daisy, the unattainable dream, and Tom, the embodiment of the forces keeping Gatsby down. But there's another character we can't forget about, Nick Carraway, the narrator.
He's such an enigma. He claims to be an observer, an outsider. But is he really? I mean, he's drawn into Gatsby's world just like everyone else.
He is, and he plays a much bigger role than he probably realizes in Gatsby's rise and fall.
He describes himself as being within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. That says so much, right?
It does. He's straddling two worlds, drawn to the glamour and excess of the East Coast elite, but holding on to his Midwestern morals. He's both fascinated and disgusted.
Like he can see the beauty and the ugliness at the same time.
And he's not just watching, he participates. He gets caught up in Gatsby's schemes, in the drama, even as he senses that it's all going to end badly.
Which is why his role as narrator is so important. We experience the whole story through his eyes. Our understanding of Gatsby and the other characters is filtered through Nick's perceptions and judgments.
And it's worth noting that Nick might not be the most reliable narrator. He's got his own biases, his own blind spots. He's deeply invested in Gatsby's story, maybe even more than he admits.
He admires Gatsby's idealism, his unwavering belief in his dreams. But he also sees Gatsby's flaws, the self-destructive path he's chosen.
It's a complicated dynamic, and it makes you wonder if we should be questioning Nick's version of events. Looking for the hidden meanings in his words, maybe Fitzgerald is using him to critique the society he's depicting.
It's a good point. The whole novel is from Nick's perspective. So everything we know is filtered through his lens. His observations, his judgments, his own moral struggles. They all influence how we see Gatsby and his world.
It's like a reminder that no story is completely objective. There's no single version of the truth.
And it adds another layer to Gatsby's story. We have to question Not just the motivations of the characters, but also the way their actions are presented to us. By Nick.
That's one of the things that makes The Great Gatsby so gripping. It's not a simple story about love and loss. It's a nuanced exploration of human nature, of how our relationships work, and how our perceptions shape our understanding of the world.
Okay, so we've dug into the characters and their motivations, but we need to talk about symbolism. Because The Great Gatsby is full of it.
It really is, and that's part of what makes it so rich and layered. Remember Fitzgerald's granddaughter saying he wanted to create something intricately patterned? That's not just about the plot. It's about the language, the imagery, the objects in Gatsby's world. They all have deeper meanings.
Let's start with the most obvious one. The green light at the end of Daisy's dock. It's like the symbol of The Great Gatsby, right?
Absolutely, and it's introduced so early in the novel in that beautiful passage where Gatsby's reaching out to it in the dark. It's obviously more than just a light on a dock.
It's about longing, desire, a dream that's always just out of reach. It represents everything Gatsby wants. The past, a future he dreams he can have, if he can just get to that light.
But the closer he gets, the further away it seems. It's the perfect metaphor for the American dream, isn't it? We work hard, we strive, we believe we're almost there. But true fulfillment always feels just beyond our grasp.
And there's a real sense of tragedy in that. The idea that some dreams, no matter how hard you chase them, are impossible to achieve. It's something a lot of people can relate to.
We all have our own green lights, right? Those things we yearn for, those visions of a better future that keep us going, even when the path is uncertain.
Okay, so the green light represents Gatsby's personal desires. But what about those crazy parties he throws? Those feel symbolic too, right? Like they're about more than just having fun.
Totally their performance, a spectacle designed to show off Gatsby's success, make it seem like he belongs, like he's happy. But they're over the top, excessive, just like his mansion and his lifestyle.
It's like he's trying to buy his way into a world that will never truly accept him, using material possessions to cover up his insecurity.
Exactly, and all that excess becomes a symbol of the emptiness at the heart of the Roaring Twenties. This society obsessed with wealth and pleasure, desperately trying to ignore its anxieties and uncertainties.
It's like the parties are a distraction, a way for these people to avoid facing the bigger questions about their lives and the world around them.
And Gatsby himself is a master of illusion. He's created this persona to hide his true origins, the source of his money. He's putting on a show for Daisy, for everyone, hoping to win her back with the trappings of success rather than genuine connection.
So the parties, the mansion, even Gatsby's carefully constructed identity, it's all a facade, like he's trying to build a reality that doesn't actually exist.
And it all comes crashing down in the end, just like the champagne glasses and confetti scattered on his lawn the morning after.
Which makes me think of another symbol, those creepy eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg looming over the Valley of Ashes. They're so unsettling, so judgmental. It's like they're watching everything unfold.
Fitzgerald describes them as blue and gigantic, with retinas 1 yard high. They're often interpreted as the eyes of God looking down on this world of moral decay.
And it's interesting that they're not looking over West Egg, where all the wealth is, but over the Valley of Ashes. This wasteland of poverty and despair, where the consequences of the character's actions are the most visible.
Like Fitzgerald is saying that real judgment isn't reserved for the rich and powerful, but for the people who suffer the consequences of their choices, the ones who bear the brunt of their moral failings.
And the Valley of Ashes itself is more than just a setting, right?
Way more. It represents the moral and social rot hiding beneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties. It's where dreams go to die, where the leftovers of progress create a landscape of hopelessness.
And it's where we meet Myrtle Wilson, Tom's mistress. She's another victim in this whole mess, trapped in a bad marriage and drawn to Tom's wealth and power.
And her desires, her yearning for a better life, end up leading to her death. It's like the Valley of Ashes becomes a symbol of the dangers of social climbing, the lie that money can buy happiness.
That's a harsh reminder that the pursuit of the American dream can be a dangerous game, full of broken promises and shattered lives.
And it exposes the vast inequality that existed in the 1920s, the gap between the rich and the poor, the privileged, and those just trying to survive.
So we have the green light, the parties, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, all these symbols adding depth and complexity to The Great Gatsby. It's like they're working on different levels, making us think about their deeper meaning.
They're both literal elements of the story and metaphors for bigger themes. Fitzgerald isn't just telling a story, he's creating a multi-layered world, weaving together symbolism, social commentary, and psychological insights. It's art that goes beyond its time period.
It's amazing how much he packs into this novel. Talking about all these symbols have made me think about the idea of toxic masculinity, that term we use now to describe the harmful behaviors and attitudes often associated with traditional ideas of manhood. Do you think that's something Fitzgerald is exploring in The Great Gatsby?
That's interesting. Think about the men in the story. Gatsby, Tom, even Nick to some extent. They're all driven by this need to prove themselves, to be in control, to win, no matter the cost.
Tom is the most obvious example. He's aggressive, possessive, and physically intimidating. He treats women like objects, trophies to be won and displayed. His affair with Myrtle is a perfect example of that.
And Gatsby, even though he's more romantic, is also consumed by this need to possess Daisy, to win her back, control her affections, mold her into the woman he wants her to be.
It's like they're both operating under this definition of masculinity that's all about power, control, and conquest. And it ends up destroying them and hurting the people around them.
I think it's a valid reading. Fitzgerald was writing during a time when traditional gender roles were being challenged. Women were fighting for the right to vote, to work, to have control over their own lives. Maybe he's using these male characters to critique the limits of those traditional roles, show how they can be harmful and ultimately self-defeating.
It's definitely something that resonates with us today as we continue to struggle with issues of gender equality and redefining what it means to be a man.
Right. And it adds another layer to our understanding of the novel. We're not just reading a love story, we're engaging with a critique of societal norms and how they shape us.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've examined Daisy, Nick as narrator, and the powerful symbolism throughout the novel.
And we've started to dig into deeper themes like toxic masculinity and the destructiveness of social class. But there's still so much more to explore. I'm ready for the final push to really get to the heart of The Great Gatsby.
Me too. Let's see if we can unlock those last secrets and come away with a new appreciation for Fitzgerald's brilliance. One thing that keeps coming up is how carefully Fitzgerald constructed this story. It's like every piece fits together perfectly.
It's true. Fitzgerald was such a skilled writer. He's not just telling us a story, he's creating a whole world, layer by layer, with every detail meticulously chosen.
And the way he plays with time is fascinating. The whole story has this sense of longing for a lost past, for a moment that can't be recaptured.
Gatsby's obsession with Daisy is all about that, right? This idea that he can somehow turn back the clock, make things the way they were, like if he can get enough money, throw big enough parties, build a fancy enough house, then he can win Daisy back and relive the magic of their first love.
But you can't change the past.
Exactly. It's like trying to grab smoke. The harder you try, the faster it disappears. It's like that Greek myth we talked about earlier with Sisyphus. He's forever pushing that boulder up the hill only to have it roll right back down.
It's such a perfect image of futility.
And Fitzgerald doesn't just tell us that, just show us. Think about how the novel jumps back and forth in time. We get pieces of Gatsby's past through his conversations with Nick, with Jordan Baker, and through his own stories, which, let's be honest, are probably exaggerated.
Right, those flashbacks are really interesting. They show us how Gatsby's dreams seem to be, the things that shaped his view of the world. But they also make you wonder if his memories are even accurate.
Exactly. How much has he romanticized the past? Is the Daisy he's so obsessed with even real anymore? Or has he built her up in his mind to the point where no real woman could ever live up to that image?
It's such a good point.
That tension between past and present, memory and reality, is at the core of the novel's tragedy. Gatsby is so fixated on recreating something that no longer exists that he's completely blind to the present.
He can't see the possibility of happiness in the here and now.
And it's something we all do, to some extent. We have our own past, our own memories, our own versions of the good old days. It's so easy to get caught up in nostalgia, to long for a time that's gone forever.
But you can't live in the past.
Fitzgerald seems to be saying that's a dangerous trap. It keeps you from being present, from embracing what's possible in the future. And it can lead to real pain, disappointment, disillusionment.
It's like he's reminding us that we can't escape the past, but we don't have to be defined by it either.
Exactly, we have a choice. Hold on to those faded memories or let go and move forward.
And that's one of the reasons this book is still so powerful, right? It speaks to a universal human experience. We've all felt that pull of nostalgia, that yearning for a simpler time. And we all know how much it hurts to realize that some things can't be undone. Time keeps moving forward whether we want it to or not.
It's such a human thing to struggle with.
Okay, so we've talked about time and memory. But we also need to think about The Great Gatsby in its historical context. The Roaring Twenties were a crazy time, right? So much change happening.
It was a whirlwind. Coming out of World War I, there was this feeling of freedom, but also a lot of disillusionment. Old social structures were collapsing, people were questioning traditional values, and suddenly there was this explosion of wealth and consumerism.
And all this new technology.
Yeah.
Cars, telephones, radios. It was transforming everything about the way people lived.
It was exciting but also unsettling. People were trying to make sense of a world that was changing faster than ever before.
And I think Fitzgerald captures that perfectly in The Great Gatsby. His characters are caught up in this social tornado, struggling to find their place.
Gatsby himself represents that Roaring Twenties energy. He's a self-made man, a dreamer, a true believer in reinvention, but he's also a warning. His story shows the dangers of unchecked ambition and the dark side of the American dream.
And it's not just the characters, the setting itself matters. Long Island, summer of 1922, it's not just a random backdrop, it's a microcosm of that era.
It's the perfect mix of old and new. You have the glittering mansions, the wild parties, these characters who seem to be constantly celebrating. But underneath it all, there's this darkness, a sense of moral decay, of something rotten at the core.
The Valley of Ashes, right. It's a constant reminder that not everyone was benefiting from the prosperity of the Roaring Twenties.
And the tragic ending of the novel hints that all that excess, the recklessness, had to come crashing down at some point.
It's interesting because Fitzgerald wrote this just a few years before the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. It's almost like he saw it coming.
Right, and that's another reason why The Great Gatsby still resonates with us. We've lived through our own times of economic uncertainty, social and political upheaval. We recognize the parallels between the excesses of the Roaring Twenties and the challenges we face today.
Like we're still grappling with the same questions about wealth, power, and what it means to live a good life.
And it shows how insightful Fitzgerald was. He captured these timeless truths in a story that's almost 100 years old, but still feels relevant and urgent.
You know, one thing I found really interesting was that Fitzgerald's granddaughter mentioned how popular The Great Gatsby was with soldiers during World War II. Why do you think that was?
That's a great question. What was it about this story that connected so deeply with those young men? Many of them were facing death every day.
I think it was the themes of loss, disillusionment, and the fragility of dreams. Those soldiers had seen the worst of humanity. They understood the cost of war, the destruction, the senselessness of it all, and they saw their own experiences reflected in Gatsby's story.
They connected with his yearning for a better future, his pursuit of a love that was ultimately out of reach, and they understood the pain of realizing that the world doesn't always live up to your expectations.
It shows the power of great literature. It transcends time and place, speaking to people across generations, connecting them through shared human experiences.
Makes you wonder how The Great Gatsby will be interpreted by future generations, right? What will readers 100 years from now make of this story?
It's hard to imagine, but I bet they'll find the same timeless truths that we do. Love, loss, ambition, the elusiveness of the American dream. They might find new interpretations, new layers of meaning as the world continues to change.
But the core of the story, Gatsby's tragic pursuit of a lost love and his yearning to belong, that will probably always be relevant.
It's a story that continues to fascinate us. It makes us question our own ideas about love, happiness, and what it really means to be successful.
And that's what makes Fitzgerald such a brilliant writer. He created a work of art that captures a specific moment in time, but also speaks to something universal about the human condition.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into The Great Gatsby. It's been quite a journey. We've explored the characters, the themes, the symbols, the historical context. We've really gotten to the heart of this masterpiece.
We've peeled back the layers, wrestled with tough questions, and come away with a deeper understanding of Fitzgerald's genius.
And I hope you, our listeners, have had a similar experience, that you've left with a renewed sense of wonder and a richer understanding of this incredible novel.
Remember, The Great Gatsby is more than just a love story. It's a social critique, a psychological study, a reflection on time and memory. It's a warning about the seductive power of the American dream and the price we sometimes pay in chasing it.
So take the lessons of The Great Gatsby with you. Follow your dreams, but don't let them consume you. Don't be blinded by the allure of wealth and status. And most importantly, cherish the real connections you make along the way.
Because in the end, those connections, those moments of shared humanity are what give our lives meaning, and that's maybe the most important legacy of The Great Gatsby.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching for those green lights that guide you on your path.